Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Low Season Traveller Insider Guides. I'm your host, Jed Brown, founder of Low Season Traveller, and this week we were delighted to be joined by Dr. Nick Middleton, whom I've always regarded as the ultimate low season traveller. 20 years ago, Nick travelled to the world's hottest, coldest, wettest and driest inhabited places in order to learn what life was like for the people who lived there. His exploits were made into a documentary series for National Geographic Channel and Channel 4 in the UK, as well as an international best-selling book. The series made an indelible mark on me, and when I first came up with the idea for Low Season Traveller, I decided that one day I'd like to speak to Nick about his journeys, as he is the most extreme version of a low season traveller. The clip at the beginning, I should point out, is where Nick is in Siberia and is inducted into the Irkutsk Walrus Club, a club which meets up every week in the winter to cut through over 50 centimetres of solid ice to take a dip in the icy waters below, which are reputed to bring significant health benefits. Here's our episode with Nick in full, and I hope that you enjoy listening to it just as much as I enjoyed recording it. Hello everyone, good evening, good morning or good afternoon wherever you are in the world, and a very warm welcome to this week's edition of Low Season Traveller Live Talks. When we talk about low season travel, it's often the case that the low season months in destinations around the world coincide with each destination's extremes of climate, whether it's the winter months in Europe, the wet season in Asia, or the hot season in the Middle East. Having travelled extensively around the world during each destination's low seasons, I was always struck by what incredible and amazing experiences can be had during these times when there are the least number of other tourists and travellers around. When I first came across today's special guest 20 years ago, he struck me as a kindred spirit, but just more extreme in every way. Here was someone who has systematically chosen to visit the absolute extremes of climatic conditions where people still choose to live. I thought he must be either insane or just very brave. And tonight, we finally get the opportunity to find out which it is when we speak to the world's most extreme low-season traveller, Nick Middleton. Nick is an award-winning geographer, writer, TV presenter, environmental scientist, and university lecturer. His curiosity about how planet Earth works and how people interact with it was fueled from an early age by his family's World Atlas, Hergé's Adventures of Tintin, and an endless flow of Willard Price novels. Today, he works and communicates on a wide variety of environmental issues and travel topics for a broad range of audiences, from government policymakers to primary school children. He also teaches at the University of Oxford, where he is a Fellow of St. Anne's College. Nick is prolific and renowned author of many books and topics, including 3 on the environment, 4 research and consulting books, a body of specialist work featuring deserts and semi-deserts, and particularly on how people interact with them. And he's also written 7 travel books, including Extremes Along the Silk Road, Adventures Off the World's Oldest Superhighway, Surviving Extremes, Ice, Jungle, Sand and Swamp, The Last Disco in Outer Mongolia, Kalashnikovs and Zombie Cucumbers, Travels in Mozambique, Travels as a Brussels Scout, a Grand Tour of Europe, Ice-T and Elvis, which is a saunter through the southern states in the US. And finally, an atlas of countries that don't exist, a compendium of 50 unrecognized and largely unnoticed states. Nick also wrote the international bestseller Going to Extremes, which accompanied a television series he wrote and presented for Channel 4 and the National Geographic Channel on extreme environments and the people who live in them. His TV documentaries have been broadcast all over the world, and his books translated into more than a dozen languages. Here's Nick in action.
My name is Nick Middleton. I live in Middle England, in the mid-latitudes. I'm middle-aged, earning a middling salary, writing travel books and teaching geography at Oxford University. My life is extremely comfortable, or at least it was. Till one mild summer's day when I was thinking about the English obsession with weather. I had an idea for a book. We complain ceaselessly about our temperate climate. But what must it be like to live with real extremes? What was life like in the hottest, coldest, wettest and driest inhabited places on Earth? I put this question to my publisher, and to my horror, she said go and find out. If it hadn't been for the women and kids doing it, I'd have wimped out, despite Sergei and Victor's relentless pressure for me to get my kit off.
Faster, faster, faster. Пальцы замерзнут, а так нельзя. Вот надо, чтобы вот. I'm a bloody girl, why not? До машины. Все, давай, вперед. Where's Siberia? Ничего страшного, ничего страшного.
Maybe it was just the nerves, but at minus 32, the ritual salute to the sun didn't do much to console me.
You ready? Okay. Опа! Опа! Пошел дальше! Hey, it's easy. I'm a walrus. I'm a walrus. Опа! Thanks, guys. Big one. I'm a walrus.
It was only after the dip that things started going wrong.
Skin feels like it's someone else's skin. It's not really my skin, though.
I think I must have been in shock, because by the time I got round to recording my diary that evening, I couldn't even stand.
So Nick, it's a great pleasure to have you with us. Thanks a million for joining us.
Not at all. Very nice to be here, Jed.
Did that bring back some memories for you, that short clip that we just showed before?
Yeah, more than a few, actually. Rather horrific memories. If I remember correctly. It's a long time ago, but it was shocking, truly shocking.
Yeah,
and
horrendous.
I don't know if you realised, but when we first turned up at that walrus club, I was in trepidation. I wasn't looking forward to it. But the first thing they said was, "Oh, we're not doing it today. It's too cold."
Were they messing with your head?
No, they weren't, because it was minus 30 or 31 or 32 or something. This is the air temperature.
Yeah.
And they said, "Oh, it's too cold. We don't usually do it if it's colder than minus 20 or 25 or something."
Did you have that moment of relief then?
Yeah, hooray! And then they sort of went into a huddle and said, "Oh, but I know you've come all this way and you're here specially, so we will make an exception."
Were you saying, no, please don't do it on my account?
So we had to go ahead, and it was quite curious, because perhaps it's obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me beforehand. Of course, getting in the water's fine, because the water's water.
Yeah.
I.e., it's not frozen. Once they hacked their way through about a metre of ice, once you're in the water, it's like just above freezing. So that's fine. It's when you come out and you're wet, and suddenly you're into this air temperature of minus 30. I think it was minus 32 that day. And you lose it really quickly, or I did, very, very quickly. And I still remember sitting there beside the water, the ice hole, trying to rub my forearm and get it dry. And I became obsessed with my forearm and getting it dry. And if those guys hadn't been there helping me, I'd still be there now.
I was going to say, you could probably get into trouble pretty quickly, actually, in those conditions, with being sort of wet, practically naked, and at minus 30. I've been out at minus 30 in northern Norway, and I was wrapped up, and I can tell you, I was very cold.
Yeah.
What it must be like with, just your boxer shorts on, and when you've just come out of water.
And being wet, that
Yeah,
doesn't help. It wasn't windy, which would have made it even worse. But I lost it extremely quickly, and continued to be not quite right in the head for a good 24 plus hours.
Yeah.
I tell you.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it was about the first day of filming, and it was the first episode of the series of documentaries about extreme places. And so I didn't really know how TV worked either. And I'd also made the mistake of not taking a spare pair of glasses, and they broke in the
really?
cold. And I remember the producer asking me, "Well, have you got a spare pair?" And I was completely out of it that evening. Oh no, don't think so. And they wanted to know the name of my optician in Oxford so that they could get a spare pair. And I gave them the wrong name, or I gave them the name of the very first opticians I had when I was a schoolboy in Southampton. And of
Oh,
course,
wow.
it was a local firm in Southampton, not in Oxford where I live now, or lived then. And eventually they found the optician to get the prescription, and they brought out a spare pair. But I was completely out of it.
Absolutely.
Completely out of it.
I'm sure.
Good for your health,
Yes.
they say.
Well, as she's saying that on the video, I'm just thinking, there's just no way.
No. Well, as I say, it was about the first day of filming. I didn't really know how things worked, and I thought, oh well, why not? I wouldn't do it now.
Yeah.
My father was a doctor, medical doctor, and when I came back and he said, "You stupid fool." But subsequently, actually, I've had heart checks, not because I've been worried, but also through doing another silly extreme thing. But and the doctor, they wired me up to a machine, and the doctor said, "Oh gosh, you've got an amazingly strong heart." So it's probably just as well.
Do you? I was going to say you don't put it down to the fact that you went in the ice water.
No, I think you have to do it regularly.
Okay.
To make it good for you. They do say in these walrus clubs, and generally in Russia and Siberia in particular, that regular douses with cold water is good for your health. And as I said in that clip there, the guys who went on the Antarctic expeditions, some of them adhered to this idea and did pretty well out of it.
When you do experiences like that, and there was a number of experiences that you had throughout the series, which we'll come on to. Do you have any regrets over stuff that you've done like that, or do you feel quite proud that for example on the ice dip, do you feel quite proud that you did it, but you'd never do it again, or do you sort of think, do you know what, no, I probably shouldn't have done that?
A bit of both. Part of me agrees I shouldn't have done it. Another part of me thinks I wouldn't do it again. But I'm sitting in Oxford comfortably in my home office, so it's rather far removed, isn't it? And if I was on a frozen river just outside Irkutsk again, and someone said, "Well, let's go for a dip," who knows what I'd say? And maybe I'd say yes. I don't know. But I'm older and possibly wiser, so probably I'd say no. But I don't know. If I was given the opportunity, who knows?
Fair play.
Maybe I would.
Well, look, we're as you know, here at Low Season Traveller, we are focused on travel at times of the year when others don't travel to destinations. In each case, and indeed, for the large part, this is mainly due to these destinations having their own particular extremes of weather during these times. You clearly set about travelling to the world's hottest, driest, coldest and wettest destinations for your book and TV series, Going to Extremes, which obviously is absolutely wonderful and what I'm really wanting to sort of talk to you about today. I suppose just to start us off, tell us how you came up with the idea and the concept and what your thought process was behind the concept.
I was in a bar, as you are.
Every story starts that way, doesn't it?
As one is. I was in a bar in Mozambique, writing. Wrote a travelogue about Mozambique before the beginning and end of the civil war there, and some guy just came up to me and said, "Could he join me and have a chat?" sure. And he started talking about, where are you from? England. I said, well, where's England? Oh, well, it's in Europe. Ah, okay, it's near Portugal, isn't it? Because Mozambique had been a Portuguese colony, so that was their sort of touchstone. I said, well, yeah, close enough. Is it cold in England? He said. I said, yes. Is there ice? Is there snow? I said, yes. Oh, many winters it gets icy and snowy. Oh, he said, I couldn't go to England. I'd die there. I'd die there in one day. And I thought, well, possibly, but highly unlikely. But nonetheless, in his mind, it was an appalling, extreme place. And that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because most British people think they live in a very middle of the road, mid-latitude part of the planet where nothing's very particularly extreme. So it sowed the seed in my mind that extremes of weather, and lots of people all over the world are interested in weather, but particularly British people, but extremes of weather are only as extreme as your own norms, what you're used to.
Yep.
So I started looking into extremes of temperature and precipitation, which are the most obvious ones, and I came across these eye-opening records. You know, the wettest places in northeastern India, where they get nearly 12 meters of rainfall on average every year. 12 meters. Here in Oxford, it's 650 odd millimeters.
And we complain at that.
Exactly. So, and then the driest desert in Chile, it's only about a millimeter of rainfall a year. So real extremes, and then the hot and the cold. And I thought, well, you know, what would it be like to live in these places? So let's go and find out. And eventually it became a TV series and a book as well. I mean, it took quite a lot of time to get it off the ground, like lots of big projects. But yeah, no, it was very eye-opening, because this relative business applied all the time. So that clip of the Walrus Club, okay, that was in Irkutsk, southern Siberia. And it was -30, and they were all complaining bitterly because it was cold for them, unusually cold for Irkutsk. Once I got further north to this record-holding village closer to the Arctic Circle than Irkutsk, and I said, "Oh, it's a hard winter, isn't it?" I said, "No, not particularly." I said, "Yeah, but I've just been in Irkutsk. It's -30." Oh, they say, "Oh, this is in Oymyakon, the record. Right. -30? Well, that's balmy. What are you talking about? It's very nice. It's very pleasant, -30." And in Oymyakon, where the record lowest temperature recorded, it was -71.2 Celsius. -71.2. You know, -30 is nothing. So much of it is relative to what you're used to. And I distinctly remember coming back from Oymyakon. I spent 3+ weeks there. And between the beginning, when it was shockingly cold, and the end, I sort of got used to it. I mean, it was still horribly cold, don't get me wrong, but I was more accustomed to it. But I really remember coming back home, flying first to Moscow, and I had the inside of a day between flights. And in Moscow, it was -10 or something. And I thought it was hot.
Really?
Having been in Oymyakon, where it was routinely -40, but didn't get that close to the -70, but it was, you know, day in, day out, it was -40, -45, seriously cold. But in Moscow, -10, it was really hot. So you do get accustomed to these things. And I also remember talking to people in Oymyakon, and so this was the first of these 4 extreme places that I went to, asking them, you know, what's it like living here in such a cold place? And everyone I asked this question to was slightly baffled. What do you mean? Well, it's just what it's like here in Oymyakon. And it gets quite warm in the summer. I mean, it also has extreme seasonal variability. So -40, -50 is routine in the winter. but it gets up to plus 30 in the summer, and it's very hot and humid, and there are lots of mosquitoes. So, climatically, it's a place of serious extremes. But the people who live there, it's just what it's like. It's back to this guy in the bar in Mozambique who thought that Britain would be appallingly cold for him. But for me, that's just what Britain's like.
It's interesting, isn't it? I suppose it depends on your point of reference, really, with all of these. When you're talking about extremes, and I suppose when I'm talking about low season travel as well, it's all about your point of reference. When someone says that such and such a place, well, it's dreadfully wet. Well, it depends on what your point of reference is.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like you're saying, if it's minus 10 in Moscow, for me right now, that would be, bloody cold. But if you're coming from minus 30 or whatever, then it's going to feel mild, isn't it?
And also there's that old saying that perhaps can be attributed to Barbara Cartland, of all people, that there's no such thing as bad weather, just inadequate clothing.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I've used that one myself.
So if you're well prepared, then that's right. I'm not entirely sure about that, because in minus 40, minus 50, where you're swathed in the best clothes are made of animal skins, and a serious hat and everything. But even so, you can get frostbite on your nose extremely quickly if that's the only thing that's available to the fresh air. So even clothing doesn't protect you totally, even like that. And of course, wearing glasses is a real pain.
Yeah,
people who are wearing masks now because of coronavirus know that you wear a mask like this and your glasses steam up very quickly. Well, in a seriously cold place, that happens, and they often get completely frosty.
Yeah,
and you have to scrape it rather than just and not to mention trying to film in those sorts of conditions. It's extremely challenging, a whole set of technical challenges.
I was going to say it came across actually on the cold one. You brought with you your trusty mobile weather station, which was, I think, like a liquid crystal display back in those days. And I was wondering to myself, would you be having problems with that? Because I was in Tromsø in northern Norway a number of years ago when it was minus 20 or minus 30, ridiculously cold. But we had digital cameras at the time, and the batteries would die in minutes. It was just ridiculous. And the northern lights would come out, and it's like, haven't got a bloody camera. Really hard work, actually.
Yes, lots of the digital equipment didn't work. We were actually filming on film, so it was very largely mechanical, and that was okay in those conditions. But there were serious problems with condensation on the lens.
Oh yeah.
So actually, going in and out of a building was a serious issue.
Yeah.
So most of or all of the buildings in Oymyakon, this coldest place, have a sort of they either have 2 or 3 doors. So there are sort of decompression chambers between the inside really warm bit and the outside. And we ended up having to leave the camera in the cold all the time, because it would come in, it would condense, and you'd get condensation on the inside of the lens. And then if you took it out again, it would freeze, which would be serious.
Yeah.
And it took hours for this condensation to disappear, so you had to leave the camera outside. But digital stuff just didn't work. We also took as you said, a video camera as a backup and to record a video diary for me, but it just didn't work. And I was writing the book at the same time, and conventional biros froze. The ink froze after quite a short time, so I had to because I was taking notes to write the book at the same time, so I resorted to using pencil.
The old pencils.
Yeah, indeed. And I also wanted to take stills, and I looked into, so didn't take a digital camera. I was shooting stills on film, but I didn't want a camera with electronics, so I bought a very largely manual one, which was great, and it worked. It was a Leica, so it was designed for war conditions, and it
Mm.
survived all of these extremes. But a problem in the cold place was that the body's made of metal. You have to be very careful, because if you touch metal in seriously cold conditions with your bare skin, then condensation on your finger immediately sticks to it, and then your first reaction is to pull your finger away, but you leave your skin behind. So you imagine doing that with a camera, and so I had to put gaffer tape all around it to stop it sticking to my face. So all sorts of sort of minor but really quite serious challenges.
Yeah, it's just stuff that you wouldn't think of. Again, certainly not for us in the UK. We certainly wouldn't be thinking of anything like that.
No. Well, here's another one that you may not have thought about. So people in Oymyakon and across Siberia in the winter eat a lot of meat, because when you eat meat, the protein burns slowly and it releases your energy in a slow bursts. I ate more than I eat normally. We had at least 4 meals a day in Oymyakon, and it was very largely horse meat.
Nice.
It was fine.
Was it okay?
Yeah, not unpleasant. But ate an awful lot of it, and very largely horse meat. And because of this change in diet, I got constipated.
Oh.
And wooden houses, very good for keeping you warm, but it was a small village with no public water supply or sewage facilities, so no pipes, because everything would freeze. So people got their water from a nearby river, and during the winter you just hack it out solid and bring it back on a cart, and you leave the chunks of ice outside. When you need it, you bring it in. Anyway, that's the water. But for toilets, they just had long drops outside. God. Okay. And one of the most horrific experiences burnt into my memory is when I find, after several days of not being able to go to the loo at all, I decided that I had to make a serious effort. And it happened to be the coldest evening, and I think it was -48.
Oh, for God's
And there you are, outside in a small wooden hut, straining over I won't go into huge details, but straining over a hole in the ground, essentially, at -48. You want to do it really quickly, not possible. It's very slow, and you get extremely cold. So that was a challenge I hadn't been expecting at all.
So if you go back, fibrogel or something similar.
Yeah, something to keep things moving. Yes, exactly so.
It's interesting. I mean, with all of these kind of different challenges that I guess each of those 4 different destinations in the first series that you sort of had to go through. I suppose which of the experiences did you expect would be the hardest experience, and were you right?
Yeah, I wasn't looking forward to cold, because I don't particularly like cold. When I have my academic hat on, I'm a hot desert man.
Yep.
And I prefer heat. And cold was hard. It was hard work, and you had to eat all the time. And the food, although it was, I did quite enjoy the taste of it, but it was more like fuel stops. You just had to keep shoveling it into your mouth to keep going. And it was tiring, and you had to wear all these heavy animal skin clothes, which are heavy, so you get tired all the time. So yeah, it was, and it was February, because the idea was to go to these extreme places at the coldest, at the most extreme time. So in Siberia it's February, very short days. So you're working hard to get the filming done in the short window of light, and yeah, it was hard work. So that I was expecting it to be hard. It was hard. It was the hardest, in ways that weren't always obvious, but nonetheless. However, having said that, the hottest place had its challenges too, because although I prefer a hot desert, they can be quite dangerous, because you're losing moisture very quickly, and because it's so hot and dry, you're not aware that you're sweating.
Mm.
So it can be quite dangerous. You can get dehydration very quickly.
Obviously, dehydration came into it when you were in Chile. You know, we sort of saw on that particular film how you were with the. I laugh and I shouldn't, but part of me was thinking again. I was thinking, I don't know how you do it. You were with the Chilean army there on their training, and you were digging these were they called dew pits?
Yeah.
Where it collects the dew. But what made me laugh was you were digging the dew pits where you were going to be collecting the dew, and then you proceeded to go, I think, off on a walk to camp somewhere which was, you know, about 8 hours away or something. Which I just
Camp far away. Yes, it was a training weekend.
Yeah,
that they kindly let me join them on.
but that
but
looked
yeah,
going actually. I mean, I think, you know, you'd sort of said in the program that you brought 2 liters of water with you, which you went through ridiculously quickly because, you know, there wasn't even much moisture in the air, and you were, you know, you seemed on that program that you were pretty much, you know, you were struggling with that.
Yes, well, I mean, without enough water, you lose it and eventually die much more quickly than without enough food. So water is a critical input for the human body, and particularly so in a hot desert. Yeah, but the interesting aspect of that is the fact that there is some moisture in the atmosphere. I mean, it's very low relative humidity, but even in the hottest, driest desert, there is some moisture. And those dew pits were well designed to try and harness and condense and materialize that what water is available. So there is some, and there are methods for harvesting it, and recycling your own urine. We also did that at the same time, and that was remarkably effective. So it just shows you that if you know some of the tricks, then you can last much longer than.
Some of them were ingenious, actually. The one where was it I don't know if it's called cloud farming or whether I'm just inventing that, but where they harness the moisture from the clouds with these really large nets on the side of the mountains, and then in the evening
fog harvesting.
Fog harvesting. I thought that was absolutely genius. And it seemed like you could get quite a lot of water from them as well.
Yes, there was this village of Chungongo at the bottom of this cliff where they built these nets at the top to harvest the fog, and the fog condenses on these very fine meshes of the net, and then it drips down into a like drain pipe affair, effectively, and then they channel the water down to Chungongo, the village. So remarkably effective. Again, so it an ingenious technique, which is the modern take on a modus operandi which dates back thousands of years, because that part of Chile, there are also archaeological finds of peoples dating back a good 9,000 years. Wow. And these, at which time it was still a very dry desert, the Atacama. And these people lived at the bases of bare cliff faces. And we think, I mean, we don't know, but we think that the reason for living at the bottom of a cliff face is because the cliff face does the same sort of thing. The fog water condenses on the cliff face and dribbles down, and you've got a source of fresh water. Because another interesting aspect of that coastal desert in Chile is hyper arid, with very little wildlife, either plants or animals, on land. Right next door, there's an extremely fertile patch of the Pacific Ocean. So it's very rich in nutrients because there's a lot of upwelling from depth, bringing nutrients to the surface. And in terms of fish, sea lions, marine life, it's extremely fertile. So you've got a very rich source of food in the water just offshore. As long as you can find shelter and fresh water to drink onshore, it's perfectly habitable. And people have been living there for, as I say, 9,000 odd years.
Incredible. Moving on to one of the themes in the first four series as well. You know, when we're talking about going to extremes and surviving the extremes, and I think, you know, for any of us who have who've struggled when there's a slight heat wave in the UK, and you know, I can't sleep in the heat. You know, for me as a kid, I remember going to stay on my family's farm. My uncle and aunt had a farm in Ireland, and there used to be ice on the inside of the windows. You know, it was freezing. You used to wear like, you know, 4 quilts. You know, not ideal. But sleep deprivation just seemed to be an inadvertent theme through the first 4 episodes. Whether it was the rain, this was actually, again, it was just very funny, because when you're in northeastern India, which is of course the wettest place, and obviously you waited for quite some time for the rains to come, but when they came and then some. I laugh. The roofs had corrugated iron, which just is absolutely bonkers for so obvious reasons, really.
Bonkers, it certainly was.
But I was just going to say, what were the challenges in terms of sleeping on each of the 4? Actually,
you froze there.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, what were the challenges on each of the 4 when it comes to sleeping, and which was the most challenging?
I think probably thinking about it on the whole now, problems with sleeping were a sort of manifestation of the challenges that I was encountering during the daytime, and you know, mentally having to try and cope with extreme conditions, unusual food, not being able to have a crap, etc., etc. Sometimes I could just go to sleep because I was totally exhausted. Other times it was more challenging, and definitely the tin roofs in Mawson Ram were the most ridiculous.
Yeah,
I mean, they ironically, of course, again, that's an outsider's perspective. I'm not used to it, and it was appallingly loud, and I couldn't get sleep at all. And I eventually ended up staying with another family in Mawson Ram, who had a traditional, like a thatched roof, and that of course was perfectly silent, so that was fine. But from the point of view of people living there, you know, the tin roof had distinct advantages because it lasted so much longer.
Yeah.
And I guess from their perspective, it was worth the few nights of disturbed sleep before you got used to it. I mean, that's fundamentally what it comes down to. In most cases, you get used to it. And probably I wasn't in these places long enough to get used to the conditions, or many of them. Although, as I said, in Siberia, I definitely became more accustomed and adapted to the extreme cold. Mm-hmm. So almost as soon as you turn up, you start fitting in to some extent. Perhaps not everyone would, I don't know. But that, I mean, I was going to say it's the downside of short visits to places. It is to some extent, or it might be, but at the same time, the upside of visiting places for a short time is that you get this intense immersion, and you have to cope with whatever it is that's different. And that, of course, is part of why I do it, and part of why most people go to foreign countries for their holidays, because they want to immerse themselves in something that's different.
Yeah.
And it's the first, it's a challenge. It's enjoyable. It's different in so many ways, and that's the big attraction. It's the big attraction for me, and I'm sure it is for most people going on unusual holidays, or holidays that don't involve, you know, an Irish pub or a British fry up for breakfast, which each to their own. If that's what you want, that's fine. But as far as I'm concerned, I can get those things in this country.
Well, exactly.
So I don't want to go there.
It seems crazy to travel the other side of the world to go to an Irish pub or whatever.
I would do. It does to my mind, but you know, whatever turns you on, I suppose.
I agree. I suppose another theme that I found kind of interesting was obviously, and it's something that I think, you know, for any of us, when we, you know, as we travel, you do experience different foods. Talk us through some of the foods that you had on your travels on this particular one.
Yeah, well, horse sticks in the mind as it's stuck in my gut in Siberia. And I had a fair amount of reindeer as well in Siberia. Very tasty. I like
Yeah.
reindeer as venison. So that was enjoyable. Or those bits were enjoyable. But unlike most people in this country, when you're closer to a subsistence lifestyle, you eat every possible bit of the creature that you butcher, and quite rightly so. And my perhaps more delicate palate wasn't as used to or as accustomed or enjoying some of the innard bits like heart and tripe. I hate tripe. I really hate tripe of any creature, but there we are. It's edible and it fuels you, so you have to eat it. Particularly if you're a guest in someone's house and they offer you, tripe or whatever it might be. I think the worst dish I've ever had was in the next series after the hot, cold, wet, dry. I did another series of documentaries and a book called Surviving Extremes, where we went to difficult terrains, one of which was ice. And I spent a month plus in Greenland. And there I had the most unpleasant food I've ever tasted. So it was a whale's liver. Okay, it's liver. But it had been kept under a series of rocks outside, I think, for 4 months to sort of mature, which in my mind meant going off. And I still remember to this day going to this. It was an outside sort of barbecue situation, and I could smell this, what I thought was a disgusting smell from several hundred meters away, of rotting whale's liver. So, I mean, not many things make me vomit, but I thought I might like to vomit just smelling the damn thing. And I got to this table and they said, oh, well, we've got the special delicacy of partly decomposed whale liver, which we'd like you to try, and we saved you a bit. Right. So there's no way I could get out of eating that. So I did, and I didn't throw it up again. I badly wanted to, but that was the most disgusting. So I'm a meat eater. I like eating meat, and I like most types of meat. And actually, perhaps the most memorable meal in a positive way was also in that second series in the rainforest in Congo. I spent some time with some Bayaka people, and we caught, as a group, we went out hunting and caught a water chevrotain, which is a forest dwelling, like a small deer creature. And we caught that, and they roasted it over an open fire. And we had it with payu nuts, which are another type of nut from a rainforest tree. But it still sticks in my memory now as one of the best, most delicious meals I've ever eaten. Absolutely delicious.
Never had it since, I take it.
No, strangely enough. Yeah. They don't do it at the local takeaway here.
I do find it always interesting, when you travel and you have these things, and it always does seem to be that the most unusual, I was going to say disgusting, but that's unfair, but the most unusual dishes seem to be reserved for the revered guests. And I did quite a bit of travel in my last position with a colleague of mine, Neil. And we always used to joke to each other saying, are they actually winding us up? Is this some kind of a ritual where it's like, let's see if we can get them to eat?
Yeah. Yes.
That whale liver that's rotting outside, yeah. I bet we could. Yeah. They wouldn't eat it now. They wouldn't eat it. No, I reckon they'd eat it.
Yeah. If we dress it up and say it's a delicacy, yeah. Who knows?
It's funny though, but like you say, I think we spoke about this off air before, about how it's hard enough sometimes to eat some of these dishes, but to eat them, when you are there as a guest, and to be receiving their hospitality, you have to not only eat it, but eat it with a smile on your face, and remark how good it is.
Yeah. If you're a polite guest, perhaps that's the problem with being brought up to be polite, is it? That
it is.
we have had it hammered into us that you have to say please and thank you,
Absolutely.
rather than I'm not eating that, that's disgusting. But yeah, there you are. I mean, as you say, when you're a guest in someone's house, there are certain social niceties it's probably better to adhere to, and swallowing something that you don't particularly want to swallow is what you need to do.
Part and parcel of it. I
But
suppose
at the same time, you also have nice surprises, as I say, like this water chevrotain in Congo. And I remember eating raw frozen fish in Oymyakon, but they also, in addition to having walrus cubs, they went fishing in frozen rivers, and you drill a hole in the ice, and as soon as the fish comes out, within a minute or so, it's frozen solid. But they like to eat it. They get the knife out and scrape the scales off, and then sort of shave off a bit of this raw fish and dip it in salt and eat it, which sounds not the best, but it was actually very nice indeed. So there are pleasant surprises as well.
Yeah. The next question that I wanted to move on to, I suppose it's linked a little bit to hospitality, but generally speaking, do you find that there is a greater sense of society and community in places where humans are living at the extremes of nature?
It's sort of tempting to say yes, isn't it? But whether it was because of the extreme climate conditions or simply because these were small places, I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I mean, yes, I think there was a strong sense of community in all these small places. But as I say, the reason for it is debatable. But interestingly enough, there was I don't know if it's still recognized as a valid idea now, but there was an anthropological sort of theory about the Afar who live in the Dalol Depression in Ethiopia, Eritrea, the hottest place, that their legendary ferocity and lack of hospitality was a lack of hospitality to outsiders, was a reaction to their harsh conditions. And it sort of makes sense if you're living in this very hot desert where resources are few and far between, particularly water, but also things to eat. Then an outsider turns up wanting to share your meager supplies. Well, should we be welcoming these people? And it's a theory to suggest that, as I say, that as a reason for the Afar being fierce towards outsiders, that they're just protective of what little they had.
Yeah, it's just kind of what was intriguing me really was when living in these harsh conditions, I suppose that it's the romantic sort of notion, I guess, that I had, that people would potentially pull in more together as a community because you've got that common enemy, I suppose, of the conditions and the harshness of the conditions. But what I suppose I hadn't thought of is, on the example that you just gave there, is also it means that, necessarily in all of those 4 different places, the resources are limited, and therefore actually that could counterbalance that quite significantly. Yeah,
very much so. The least traditional place of those 4 extreme settlements I visited for the hot, cold, wet, dry was in Chile, and it shows you that actually, if you've got enough money and the know-how and the cash to buy in the technological ways of dealing with extreme conditions, then you can live virtually anywhere. And Chile is a relatively developed country, and although there's very little rainfall in the Atacama, they have rivers coming down from the Andes and technologies like the fog harvesting, and therefore they adapt very well to the lack of available atmospheric moisture.
Yeah.
And as I say, the cold places, you could get away from the cold because they had houses that were very well insulated. They had billions of trees that they can burn for fuel in Siberia. So you could get away from the cold quite happily. You couldn't get away from the heat down in Dalol because, you could get into the shade, but this feeling of being inside an oven all the time, you couldn't get away from that because you were away from air conditioning. So there is technology, air conditioning, but in the sticks, in the rural areas of Ethiopia, then there is no air conditioning, needless to say. So you could never actually get away from the extreme heat.
Yeah.
And that became challenging after a while, even though I prefer heat.
Yeah, that kind of extreme. Did you get a sense overall in each of those places where people are living in the extreme climatic conditions? Did you get a feeling that they would rather live somewhere else? Were they aware of what we might consider to be the hard climatic conditions, and did you sort of get a feeling that given the choice, they would rather it wasn't like that, or were they actually so fully adapted that no, actually this is our home, we wouldn't have it any other way?
Hard to generalize, but Here goes. I remember in the house of the lady we stayed with in Oymyakon, this record-holding coldest inhabited place in Siberia, on the wall of her kitchen was a huge poster the size of your map behind you, also glossy, of fruit, apples and oranges and bananas and watermelons, really a fresh fruit. And when I first saw that, I thought, oh, this is a clear indication of them yearning for the availability of fresh produce, because fresh fruit and vegetables are just not available in Oymyakon in Siberia for many months during the winter. There was a short summertime when they could get hold of them, but things like apples and watermelons, exotic fruits from far, far away, which just not available most of the time. And I thought, oh, that's them yearning for better conditions. But I asked the lady of the house, or suggested this theory to her, and she looked at me as if I was stupid and just said, no, it's a nice picture of fruit.
Okay.
So, okay, fair enough. But I also asked people about this perennial question of what's it like living in these extreme climatic conditions. And with few exceptions, there were a few, but in most cases, people didn't think of these conditions as being anything other than their normal. And in most cases, east, west, home's best. This is where we live, and it's a nice place. Thank you very much. Of course, you might, talking to me, you might think it's extreme, but to us, this is just what it's like. Having said all that, yes, there were on occasion situations where people yearn to get out and leave and go to a big city in some cases, but they were few and far between, I have to say. And I also, just another thought that's come to mind of from the second series. So it was from harsh climates in the first series to harsh physical terrains. So it was ice, sand, forest, swamp. We spent a long time in New Guinea, the Indonesian side of the island of New Guinea, and spent some time with a tribe called the Kombai, who are renowned for living in tree houses. And I remember spending some time with a headman in a village in a tree house, which must have been 15, 20 meters off the ground. And all the anthropologists say rightly that these guys live in tree houses for defense purposes, because they're continually off and on at loggerheads with nearby tribes. So I made a point of asking this head man in this treehouse, why do you live in tree houses? Because I've read what the conventional wisdom was, or wanted to hear what this guy said. And his first point was, yes, it's for defense reasons, because you can go up into your treehouse, you pull up the ladder, and you're relatively safe. You are safe. So tick. But then he went on. He said, it's also better for mosquitoes up here, because this was a swampy terrain, 30 meters above the ground, bit of a breeze, not nearly as many mosquitoes. So much better from that point of view, which I hadn't read before.
Mm-hmm.
But the best one he saved till last. He said, and the other reason we like living in tree houses is because of the views.
Oh, nice. Yeah, did not expect
Fantastic
that.
views you have from up here. And he was absolutely right. Of course it was. Fantastic views over the forest. So while some of the conventional wisdom was spot on, there were also these other aspects which are actually universal. You know, these people in New Guinea wore no Western clothing, whatever. They wore loincloths and gourds over their private parts, and the women wore skirts made of sago palm. So they were very unwesternized, and their diets were also interesting. They ate sago grubs, which are these huge, like caterpillar things, or another example of a type of food that wasn't ever going to be my favorite. So very different in many regards, and they also have a reputation as headhunters, which no one ever confirmed, but no one ever completely denied either. So very different, but there were these sort of universal values. So we don't like mosquitoes, and we get great views from up here. So in some sense, they were not that different from me and you at all, because some of their values and their dreams and aspirations were the same the world over.
Do you find that that's something that we do maybe sometimes when we travel? We judge people, or judge people's quality of living by our own standards. And I remember being in Madagascar not so long ago, and somebody sort of said to me, "God, you know, the poverty, it breaks your heart." And I was saying, well, you know, yeah, incredibly different to what we had. You know, 80% of the population doesn't have access to electricity, and you know, the kids have got no shoes on, and they're kicking not a football, but it was like, you know, something taped together like a football. But I was saying, you know, I haven't seen anybody unhappy since I've been here. And sometimes you just wonder, you know, is it, you know, are we making assumptions about their quality of life because they haven't got, I don't know, you know, what we've got in terms of Wi-Fi and, I don't know, the fridge or whatever else. Is that a mistake that we sometimes make? We judge people's quality of life according to our Western standards.
Well, yes, but inevitably we're going to judge them in that sort of way, or because that's what we know. Unfortunately, of course, the power of the media and the power of the media in the Western world in particular, particularly the United States, but also Europe, people all over the world see desirable images of people like us living in conditions like this, which many people find desirable. So to some extent, trying to assess the values of other people, you can't do it in any other way than from your own standpoint. What you say, I'm sure, there's more than a grain of truth. You know, just having lots of things doesn't necessarily make you happy. I think some of the most valuable lessons I've learned have been absorbed spending time with nomadic peoples who have very few physical possessions because they move about a lot and they don't want to carry all this rubbish with them, so they don't actually need it. But there's differences between needs and wants and desires and so on and so forth. Your football, you're absolutely right about a football that isn't a football. It's just a bunch of rags taped together. But I remember in my primary school in Southampton, we weren't allowed footballs in the playground because they were dangerous, because people kicked them hard and sometimes people got hurt. So we played either with likewise, a paper ball sellotaped up, didn't last that long.
Yeah.
Or with nuts, there was a peach tree in the headmistress's garden, and we used to get the nuts, so they're about this size, and play with those. So I'm not saying I'm come from a poor background, I don't particularly, but you make do with what you've got.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people all over the world, unless they're clinically depressed, just make do. But that doesn't mean that they don't have aspirations as well, and many of us do. And I suppose it's all about really finding some sort of manageable, happy average. But nonetheless, you and I live a much richer in dollar terms and physical possession terms than most of the people on this planet. So we're very lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. I keep telling my daughters that all the time as well.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
This week we heard that apparently the world's hottest ever temperature was recorded in Death Valley. You might have seen this. It was reported on the BBC, among others. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts with regards to the onset of global climate change. Do you foresee that the world's hottest, coldest, wettest and driest places would change if we were to repeat this exercise in 20 years' time? Or indeed, have they changed already? It's been 20 years since that first series.
Yes, well, I don't know about that. I did see mention of the Death Valley temperature. I can't remember what it was. I didn't actually see the number. Say again?
152 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what it is in Celsius.
Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
It's the only country on the planet who still talks about Fahrenheit. It doesn't mean anything to me. Anyway,
it was reported that way in the BBC as well, which was frustrating as well.
Yeah, there you are. I don't know. I mean, Death Valley has claimed highest recorded temperature several times. There is a higher one that's been recorded in Libya, but I don't know the exact details. But some people look askance at the Libyan one because it wasn't recorded properly. I don't know. Who knows? But to go to your question about global warming, yeah, I mean, all of the climate model, the computer climate models that are used to project future climate conditions for the planet, they all agree on extremes, that while on average you get warmer, and that's been documented to be the case, if you get warmer on average, you're almost also likely to get higher extreme values. So highest temperature, yes, likely to be broken. Rainfall is a bit trickier, and low temperature, the whole distribution of temperatures tends to shift towards a warmer condition. So you're more likely to get higher spot temperatures, but less likely to get lower spot temperatures. So yes, the extremes of heat are likely to be broken. Rainfall is rather trickier. But as with all of these records, once you start looking into things, it's by no means straightforward. First off, there's the did you use the right kit to measure your temperatures? And then there's when you say it's the rainiest place, what are you actually saying? So I went for annual average, but the interesting aspect about northeastern India is this continual rivalry between two nearby villages. There's Cherrapunji had the record when I was at school doing geography, and I remember drawing a bar chart of average annual rainfall for several different stations and having to deal with Cherrapunji because several of the stations were like this, and then Cherrapunji was up here somewhere and trying to get the scale right. Yeah. So Cherrapunji had the record. When I went, it was Mawsonram, which is a village just up the road, and they do have this rivalry. But so Cherrapunji would say, oh, well, we used to have the annual average record, but we don't anymore. That's Mawsonram. However, we have the record for the greatest amount of precipitation in one day and one rainfall event and 1 month. So, all of these things you can chop and change in multiple different ways. But in short, in answer to your question about global warming and heat records, yes, they are likely to continue to be broken.
Interesting. We're getting towards the end of our time, Nick. So just a final few quick-fire questions for you, if you wouldn't mind, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Most incredible travel experience that you've had. I mean, you've had so many. It must be tough.
I think probably I'd go back to 1987, the first time I went to Mongolia, and it was a hard-nosed communist country. It took me 5 years to get an entry visa. And when I did eventually get there, this is before internet, before lots of things, just finding any details about Mongolia in the 1980s was extremely difficult. And suddenly I was there, and it felt like being a man from outer space.
Yeah.
People would come up to me in the street and just...
Really?
One guy even opened my mouth and checked my teeth. Hair, I haven't got much now, but they check out my hair because I was obviously something seriously weird and different.
A novelty.
A real novelty. So that, for all sorts of reasons, Mongolia was the most out there experience.
Most afraid
Mongolia
you've ever
in
been?
the 80s. Afraid. A couple of times probably. There was a time in Mongolia, there were Russians in Mongolia and they hated them. The Mongolians hated them. There were one time when I thought I was going to get seriously beaten up. Fortunately, I run fast, so I wasn't. But there was also another time in going back to Mozambique during the end of the Civil War, a couple of times when I was confronted by people with Kalashnikovs and I wasn't quite sure whether I'd come away in one piece.
Fair play. Yeah, that sounds pretty frightening. All right.
But another sort of weird, frightening one. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Was in Moscow in an underpass. I was mugged by a gang of children.
And you're admitting to this?
Yeah, 6 of them. But because it was just seriously weird. None of them can have been more than 8.
Oh,
6
really?
small boys coming up asking for a handout, and I said no and kept walking. But they were amazingly well organised. So 6 of them, right? I'd suddenly 2 on each arm, holding my arms out, and I couldn't move them. And the other 2 were in my pockets. And then they all disappeared.
Smart, though.
So, and there were lots of people all around, and they just took absolutely no notice.
Yeah.
So that was quite scary because it was like being Gulliver and Lilliput. All these small children, but the sheer numbers.
Yeah.
For a while, they dealt with me, and I can't remember what I lost, but they nicked everything in my pocket.
Bless them. Biggest travel.
Not bless them.
Biggest travel regret.
Ooh, regret. Oh, yeah, okay. I missed the Velvet Revolution in Prague in whenever it was, 1990, 91.
Yeah, it's been 1991.
Because I was so badly hungover.
No.
Yeah. So, I was working in Vienna for a UN organization called UNIDO, and so it's a long time ago. But part of the deal was I'd go out to Vienna, and I had business class tickets, which after a few trips I realized that it enabled me to stop anywhere on the way or on the way home between Vienna and London. So I thought, oh, well, gosh, I could go to all sorts of places if I wanted. And indeed I did. I went to Prague for the weekend. But the night before, I'd had this situation with, or I thought it was a situation with a woman in Vienna, and she stood me up on my last night. So I drank too much. I was horribly hungover, got on the plane the next day, went to Prague, checked in, and just felt really terrible because I had drunk a lot. And that night was the beginning of the Velvet Revolution. And I distinctly remember going, but I missed it completely, because I was in such a bad state. Remember going to breakfast the next morning, and it was complete chaos because all the waiters had gone.
Yeah.
And I then flew home, and I sat next to a guy from ITN on the plane, and he said, "Oh, all the excitement in Prague, blah, 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 blah. Were you there?" And I'd missed it. I completely missed it. Because it was so hungover. So I haven't told many people that story because I'm still a bit embarrassed about it.
There'll be a handful more now that know.
Yeah.
We are pretty much out of time. So final question. What overall was the best moment from that first series, which will always stand out in your memory?
Wow, there's a question, because there were so many high points and a few low points, many surprises. I mean, a huge number of memories, because we did them all in a year, which was actually sort of too much. It was hyper concentrated experiences. But I think one of the many standouts, if I've only got to pick one, was down in the Dalol Depression in northern Ethiopia. Was this hottest place, and it was the most surreal landscape I've ever come across, because it's very rich in sulfur, and it's also it's active tectonically. So there's lots of bubbling geysers, and the whole landscape is bright yellows and oranges. I mean, really vivid bright yellows and oranges, and weird sort of shapes of salt towers, and the most extraordinary place I've ever seen in my life. If I've got to choose one, I'll choose the Dalol salt rainbow-coloured depression.
Super. Well, look, we're going to show that clip now before we go to the questions. But I just want to say thanks a million to you, Nick, for joining us on this week's live talk. It's been utterly fascinating, and I believe that you're going to stick around for a few minutes longer to take a couple of audience questions, if I'm right.
You're absolutely right. I am still here. I want to see the clip again, because it's a while since I've seen it.
Brilliant. So, all right, we'll get onto the clip just now. Nick, thanks a million. It's been a pleasure.
Not at all.
In reality, it was 5 days before I reached Dalol. From Hamadella, it was too far for the camels, and we couldn't carry enough water to survive. The only way we could get there was to be dropped in by air. But nothing could have prepared me for the landscape we passed. An American mining company came to this alien place to mine phosphate. They even built a railway to bring the water in and take the phosphate away. But they only managed to last for 6 years.
So there you have it. Huge thanks again to Nick Middleton for generously sharing his insights with us this week. And if you'd like to enter a free draw to win a signed copy of Nick's book, Going to Extremes, please visit lowseasontraveller.com/extremes-competition. And that's our podcast done for this week. Thanks as always for your company. Have a great week. Stay healthy, stay safe, keep your travel dreams alive, and don't forget to share this podcast with your friends, family, and social networks. And finally, remember that now, more than ever, travel is better without the crowds.